Ladies, gentlemen, and friends beyond the binary, a very good morning, afternoon, evening, or whatever time zone you fall in. We are ever so grateful for your attendance to our little parallel event in the sea of parallel events at the United Nations NGO Commission on the Status of Women's 67th Forum. We are the Young Adult Network Program, a faith-based young adult group consisting of Unitarians and Unitarian Universalists worldwide, specifically from 11 countries: Canada, France, Germany, Hungary, India, the Philippines, Romania, Singapore, Rwandan refugees residing in Uganda, the United States of America, and Wales. This program is a brainchild of the International Convocation of Unitarian Universalist Women, or the IWC for short, and funded in part by the Unitarian Universalist Funding Program and the European Unitarian Universalists. This program kicked off on 5th March 2022 with Miss Emily Jarrett and I, Lisa Lamar, acting as co-leaders and facilitators. On perusal of the priority theme, we envisioned a presentation that perfectly fit our group, one that drew upon a years-long culmination of experiences and knowledge. As such, our parallel event is titled Learning and Mobilizing in the Digital Space, Experiences of Global Young Women. These experiences have been condensed into 60 minutes and will be presented by two speakers from the program, Ms. Siân Evans and Elle LLewellyn Zhang, who will also be peppering in their own grassroots level experiences with their own similar groups in their respective local communities. To provide a differing aspect to our form of mobilization, we have invited Parichehr Kazemi, an academic. So, without further ado, we will begin.
A warm welcome to everyone here. It is my pleasure today to introduce to you our very first speaker for today's event, Ms. Siân Evans. Ms. Siân hails from South Wales, the United Kingdom. She has a bachelor's degree in medical engineering, as well as a master's degree in applied mathematics. She is one of the founding members of the UK-based young adult group, #Blessed, as well as a participant in the International Young Adult Network Program of the International Convocation of Unitarian Universalist Women. I would encourage all the audience, if they would like to have questions, etc., you can write it down in the chat. After all our panelists have spoken, we'll be opening the floor for discussions as well as a Q&A round. So now, please welcome Siân Evans. Siân, over to you.
Hi, everyone, and thank you, Kenkor. I recently became co-leader of my chapel's youth group, #Blessed, which is currently the only Unitarian youth group within the UK set up for 18 to 30-year-olds. The team was formed during the first UK lockdown in the pandemic and has grown exponentially in numbers. Social isolation was a common frustration within the group, as we were missing our families and friends and communities. To combat this, we created a safe virtual space free of judgment. And despite the unprecedented circumstances of the world, we found solidarity in each other.
Siân, you're muted.
Thank you. Where was I? Similarly, the Young Adult Network Program also began during the pandemic. And this instantly felt like a safe space that not only encouraged individual growth and progression, but nurtured the cohesion of ambitious young women. Being able to meet online has had great results for both groups. I'll be taking this time to draw comparisons between the two and highlighting successes. A noteworthy difference is the global nature of the young adult program and the local essence of #Blessed. Meeting online has its advantages. It is so versatile, consolidating people of different ages, experience, impact, and strengths. Being able to meet digitally caters for a multitude of learning, communication, and listening methods. Virtual meetings target visual, non-visual, and auditory learners. Virtual spaces bring the obvious convenience of being able to tune in anywhere, regardless of your geographical location. Although this can be limiting, as not everyone has access to the internet, or a reliable connection at that. A clear disadvantage to virtual international meetings is time zones. Being able to suit everyone involved was an impossible task. Not everyone was happy with the set time of the meeting, and sometimes plans clashed. On the other hand, #Blessed has proved much easier to set up ad hoc meetings and virtual social nights when we are all in the same time zone, regardless of where we're located within the UK. One drawback with our young adult program with the virtual meetings is that we can't meet face-to-face. Digital can take you so far, but without in-person meetings, the human aspect of mobilizing around a cause is harder to grasp. Tech can only take you so far. It harvests inorganic conversations and limited socialization. Similarly, bonding with each other initially was harder. In-person interactions don't usually include muting everyone and taking it in turns to talk. It can instill a sense of disjointed connectivity, and this is a big barrier in being able to get to know each other on an individual basis. Despite starting online, we were able to take our #Blessed meetings and projects offline. Even if we weren't all within the same nation, we are in regular contact and make a point to meet with one another at least once a year. Keeping these comparisons in mind, I'd like to share the results from a survey conducted during May 2022 of the Young Adult Network Programme to discover what were the issues faced when meeting virtually was the only option. When asked, are the expectations you had prior to joining the programme being met? Despite being only 2 months into the programme, all participants answered yes. When asked, are there issues preventing you from joining the meetings? The results were more varied. A few confirmed they felt a lack of connectivity. A quarter said the meetings clashed with existing plans. However, the majority said they had no conflicting issues preventing them from joining our virtual spaces. A year after the programme's conception, participants were asked about their experience on the whole. 60% of those asked said that the programme had been great. This second survey inquired as to whether prior expectations were met throughout the programme, and most results were positive. With a variety of sessions across the 12 months, we have come to learn that several different meetings and speakers stood out to participants. These include LGBTQIA+, climate, coaching, and reviewing digital violence for women sessions. I'd now like to take some time to highlight some of #Blessed achievements made possible using digital tools. During the pandemic, through #Blessed, my sister and I took our first Zoom Sunday service. The first time in decades that young people had been invited to lead worship. Seeing our congregations smiling back at us from their respective homes was so encouraging. It was a challenge for those unconfident with technological devices to tune into our online services, but with perseverance and support, it was clear that anyone at any age could utilize digital tools. Now everyone looks forward to our annual in-person youth service, where we're given the chance to experience leadership. On journeys to and from chapel, we were disheartened by the amount of waste illegally discarded on our mountain. We have endeavoured to remove as much as we safely can, although it has taken time to collaborate with our local council on the issue. Our persistent networking has led to a combined effort in removing waste, and signs have appeared on the mountain in support. After each removal, we have taken to social media pages to raise awareness of the environmental problems we face and to share our achievements. We've received a mass of support from local towns and now work alongside an environmental group of volunteers who have become our greatest allies. In an attempt to spread some local positivity, last summer we conducted a community-based social project where we painted a rock to look like a snake's head and left it on top of Gellionnen mountain. We used Facebook to appeal to local groups and explained that Sally the snake had lost her body. Before long, Sally stood at 70 stones. It was so nice to connect with such varied groups, including a nearby primary school. Such a simple project really took off and shows just how far-reaching technology can be. We have used digital tools to map and track a 2022 project. This is ongoing, where we leave ribboned books in busy areas in hope that they might be picked up and taken to new homes or passed on. Leaving books for people to find is a small act of kindness that spreads positivity and joy. So far, we have mapped over 30 deposited books around Wales, England, Scotland, Italy, Switzerland, and Denmark. Additionally, the #Blessed team were gifted 420 trees from the Queen's Green Canopy. They've been planted successfully and contain varieties that boost bee populations. These trees were gifted to community groups and have been digitally mapped by the National Trust. All trees can now be seen online on one big map that stretches across the UK. It really highlights the effect of dispersed collective action. Our results show we are making a difference. Going out and achieving something brings us together, and along the way we are showing the impact of youth leading change, collective teamwork to reach a greater goal. We are changing the stigma associated with young people and encouraging others to join in. All of these achievements and benefits, not just to the people around us, but to the world, started from an initial interaction in a virtual space using digital tools. This shows what can be created when people work together and use technology to assist in accomplishing a goal. The Young Adult Programme was designed to target on a global level, with the intention of trickling down to local through us to our respective communities. Precisely the opposite of how we have taken our approach with #Blessed. We began in a small Zoom space, and by going offline, we have started small and local, now working towards international impacts. Being a part of such a successful community makes me question if starting at global was the most realistic approach for the Young Adult Programme. Should we have worked the other way? Would this have been a more sustainable and effective approach? In future, should we try for regional groups and then have a few global check-ins? Perhaps going global straight away was too ambitious for a first step. In our second survey, the team was asked to ponder on what could be improved for future programmes similar to this one. Suggestions received included more focus on personal growth. One voice said, there should be more in place to bring participants together. We can work together and discuss together, but for lasting connections and relationships, it would be an idea to set up activities so that participants can bond and connect on a basic human level first, with a second voice echoing a focus on fostering relationships and bonds. Others suggested more activity-based sessions and the chance to work on projects. We have heard from many voices across the year, and it has been an incredible experience hearing the inspirational stories of such strong women. To imagine future programs like this one that bring ambitions, ideas, and enthusiasm together is so powerful and instigates a feeling of hope for our generation and the next generation of women. Participants were asked what their biggest takeaway has been from the program. Answers included friendship, more knowledge on life coaching, leadership and project management, honoring ourselves, personal confidence, and experiencing how perspectives differ according to issues and situations as a result of cultural and social contexts. I personally am so inspired by all the incredible souls I have met through our virtual space. Thank you to all the new friends I have made. I'm extremely proud to have walked this journey with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sean. I believe we all today can appreciate the importance and value of the virtual space. Thank you so much for sharing with us your experiences as member of 2 young adult programs, both of which were virtual, one global and the other regional. It was really interesting hearing you speak about your take on both of these groups, the similarities, the differences, the victories, I should say, success, and as well as the shortcomings and the lessons that you've taken from both of these experiences. But I believe the most important thing that I took away from what you've spoken today is, you've showed us through your words how young people today, are motivated, are coming together, working together, taking initiatives, and they're using this virtual space and the digital tools to the maximum and for the good. Thank you so much, Sean. Thank you.
Okay, I would like to introduce our next speaker, our next panelist, Ms. Elle LLewellyn Zhang. She is an LGBTQ and an interfaith activist in Singapore. She likes to connect with people at grassroots level and does peer support for queer and minority persons with her partner Melissa. She also studies philosophy, politics, psychology, piano, and plays video and board games and tabletop adventures. She is also one of the founders and ex-facilitators of the NGO group called YouYou. Over to you, Ms. L.
Hello everyone. Can you all hear me? All right. Okay. Thank you. So hi. I'm here to give 10 tips on how to create a safe space for someone. All right, be it online or offline. All right, especially if they are female, minority, or queer. All right. Perhaps you have someone you want to reach out to, someone different, someone whose background is a whole new world away from you. Suppose you want to stand up against an injustice, but realize you should talk to someone personally affected about it first. Maybe you want to be there for yourself. After you were excommunicated from church, after including people of all faiths, genders, and sexualities to your community, like my partner and I, what do you do? How do you make space for someone, including for yourself? Right, before I go on, I think there's no screen for me to share. So you just listen to my voice, just relax and just feel free to, be yourself and take a breath, all right? And if there's anything you want to ask, feel free to ask, all right? Either through the messaging or if there's something triggering, please let me know as well. All right. YouYou's community principles were conceived from a very simple adoption of gay-straight alliances in the USA, where students who were bullied for being queer come together to support each other in a safe space. Soon, the teachers and the school supported that initiative, and it became a sanctuary for queer teens, as well as a bridge between those who wish to learn about queer issues and those who wish to share. So I'm going to show you the things that worked for me as a facilitator of a queer support group in Singapore, catering to people of all ages and making sure that they are emotionally supported regardless of race, religion, gender, romantic, and sexual orientation. Number one, be vulnerable. This is still difficult for me to say, but I always come out as female and transgender in every session of YouYou. And I repeat to my group, no matter if they heard it for the first or 400th time, my name and my pronouns, Elle, she, her, Caesar. Doing so sets the baseline of what is acceptable in the group, all right? Especially if you're one of the leaders. If you wish to encourage people to share about certain issues and aspects of their lives, you should do the same if you can too, all right? In fact, we can try it out here, all right? For any questions for me later on, please tell me your name and pronouns if you can, all right? An invitation to vulnerability in a group creates a culture of openness and safety, and it's easily the most unmentioned thing in group dynamics, all right? 2, ensure confidentiality. You can't share something if you don't trust the listener. It's a simple assurance. I will hold sacred what you say to me, and I will not divulge without your permission. Trust is not something people should believe 100% at the first meeting too. It comes with small tests, reliability, and reciprocation. It's not difficult to start this in a queer space since almost everyone has a closet. But you'll be surprised on how often communities will let privacy slide away for sake of fame and gain. 3, be inclusive. Understand that if you're going to be there for someone, you have to include them into your space. And others will always be different from you, be it major or minor differences. I'm going to assume that most of you are quite for human rights. So there is no need to explain the value of inclusiveness and diversity to you, unlike so many who want just their type of people in society. But being inclusive means accepting that there will be gaps of underrepresentation in your group. Say, in a typical queer group, there will be a dominant number of gay men or sometimes gay women. Are we making the trans people feel welcome? What about the non-binary people? And these hard questions doesn't just apply to a community. Do you know of the narratives of the opposite gender or other races and nationalities? Most importantly, what can you do to make room for them? Be willing to learn and accept things that you don't understand. I realized my gender when I was 30 years old. I would never understand what is it like to grow up struggling with my sexuality. I'm assigned male at birth, all right, and I'm trans female, but being gay meant that dating women was easier for me. Gay dating and courtship is something that I have deep empathy for, especially after hearing what my friends went through just for the sake of pleasure, romance, or companionship. I think the best thing is to just start from a point of humility and acknowledge that we don't know everything. And people are nice enough to grant that we don't need to be 100% informed to be able to be accepted and loved. Be honest about yourself, be true to yourself, and share your intentions. It's almost the same as being vulnerable, actually, but doing so allows others to come clean and share how they really feel as well, and give space to challenge each other's motivation and life positions, and let yourself be challenged too. Once you've created a small group, right, where people feel welcome and included, this is how you can keep them. Be tolerant of different ideas and bring them to the table for discussion. It's how to create a democratic community too. Hence, everything is up for talk unless it becomes a trigger warning. There's a fine line, being in Singapore as well, there's a fine line between open conversations and censorship, right? Trust me, Singapore, we deal with that a lot. You want to protect people from being mentally triggered, but you also want to promote free speech. Generally, as a rule, YouYou promotes freedom unless it affects safety. There's really no hard line we can draw. Each community is specific, and it is the responsibility of every rule maker and enforcer to see what they mean best for their country. Establish safe rules and be firm about them, all right? 2 issues that you have to ask yourself in every social group, all right? Attendance and productivity. What does each member expect from each other as a commitment? And what do we wish our gathering and collaboration to effect? Hence, the agreed upon rules and the willingness to abide and enforce the rules and punishments if they are broken. I see a lot of social experiments online and different standards, from lawlessness, total lawlessness, to abject tyranny, all right? But the general idea is that if the rules are weak, then people will tend to lax their behavior because we don't have to face the consequences. And therefore, social rules will start to dysfunction. All right, back to the personal. Validate experiences. The reason we come together is to bring everyone's uniqueness together into a stronger community. For a queer group like ours, it's not difficult to assume that everyone is woefully unheard. All right. I often bring the example of the Me Too movement, where it took so many women to convince the world of one man's wrongs. Always, always validate the experience of the victim, the silence, the survivor, even if they might not be accurate. It is immensely important to let their story be heard. We all come from a place where we have our own stories, and we have this intrinsic need to share our lives with people too. It really takes very little to say, I hear you, and although I might not fully comprehend or empathize, I appreciate your sharing. Make it a mission to hear other narratives as much as we storify our own. Appreciate, when in meetings, appreciate each other's presence. There's a high chance, okay, this is a bit emotional for me. There is a high chance that all of us right now, we will not see each other again in each of our lifetimes. All right. Especially for many of y'all who are actually not my friends. You took the time today, right now, to hear me share, and I deeply appreciate it. In the end, we might not do much in terms of money, all right, or change, but we can always make each other feel good. We can relieve each other of our loneliness in the world, and we can give each other the respect that everyone deserves. And we can give the time and attention everybody needs when we are down and out. I always tell my members in YouYou that the group can always dissolve, all right? It's okay to fall apart. What is most important, all right, much more important than the sustainability of the group, is the friendships and the connections that you have made along the way. Because your feelings are still very important, and we need to live in a world where we can still be able to care for each other as peers and friends. I do apologize if I don't speak specifically about the digital climate, all right? But I do have a lot of experience with that, and YouYou does have its online platforms. But I believe that in principle, behind every screen right now is a very human and relatable person. If we apply these soft skills and continue to promote empathy, diversity, and inclusivity, Zoom and social media can be just as humanized as physical groups face-to-face. The last tip all right, that every group should center, the last tip I'm going to give today is that every group should center around the humans that occupy that space. It should be something that inspires the people within to improve and work together as a common goal, and not just to enrich an ideology or a company. I hope that you find my experiences enlightening. And if you succeed or fail from what I have said today, all right, in the future, I want to hear from you, all right? I'll link my Facebook later, and you can always message me, all right? Thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you so much, Ms. L. Thank you for supporting queer groups. Yes, we do need inclusivity, and we need to be true to ourselves, like how you have done. So, especially for you to motivate others, be it a queer group, minority, or even women for a fact. So, thank you, Ms. L, so much for all of your tips. Our third presenter has actually some issues in joining, so we will move ahead with the discussion of question and answer. So if anyone has any questions for our speakers, so you can write in the chat, or maybe you can put your hands up, and we do have one question, and this is for Ms. Siân. So this question is from Tanya Darling. She said, would you say that strong, motivated, and autonomous local groups working on their own projects with global check-ins is the best way to run similar initiatives, and that centrally led or administrated efforts are likely to be less effective?
Hi, thank you for your question. Yes, I do think that more locally based groups and initiatives work better, at least from experience. In terms of #blessed, we wouldn't be where we are today if it wasn't for support from the people around us, people from our chapel, local towns, local groups. And I think that makes a big difference when you've got other people around you who are supportive and caring and want to help you. I also think there's less pressure on smaller, more local initiatives. Thinking globally can be quite a scary thing, especially to start with. So yes, I definitely think more local groups working on their own projects is a better way to start.
All right, thank you for answering that, Ms. Siân. If anyone has any question, you can use the chat, or yes, you can use the raise hand feature. Okay, so this is a question for Ms. L. What's an easy way to filter membership in a safe space?
That is quite a difficult question, but it's a very, very good question, actually. I can't really say that there is a formula to it, all right, but in my organization, we do have gatekeeping, all right, and we actually are very honest about it, all right. So we have our run-ins with homophobia and transphobia as well, and people with those intent, right, to want to voice out these opinions, you know, of discrimination. So we try to be compassionate, all right. We try to base the content of a person's character based on their actions, all right? So the best filter, I would say, is that if they do something wrong, then we have to gently remind them that, you know, this causes harm to the rest of the members, all right? But that is very exhausting, to be really honest. I mean, if a person is a stranger, we have no background information about them, then this is the only way we can actually find out. But if, let's say, if a person has a reputation of trolling, you know, and this is actually very common in online platforms, all right? So there are actually, because Singapore is highly digitized, there are many talking heads, for example, hateful religious figures, as well as politicians, right? They wish to use our platform to reach out to people, to voice out their opinions, which are generally quite unpleasant, right? So obviously, we don't even give them the opportunity to actually come into the group. And well, for those online, they know ban hammers. All right, and just banning, all right, it's very normal, all right. But actually, one thing is actually the accountability. The person who actually places the gatekeeping and the ban, they must make their power known. Suppose I have the authority to veto anyone from coming into my organization. I have to be answerable to everyone in the community. Why did I stop someone from coming in? I have to make myself explainable. And if my explanation proves to be insufficient, all right, then I would have to be accountable for that as well. It's a kind of check and balance system, all right. And I think that is the, you know, ultimately the reason why we want to do all these things actually is to keep a standard of integrity. All right, because that's what we really have as a group. You know, if a group does not have the integrity, then people always see us as, you know, like as lacking of principles, and that's actually very bad as well. Right. So I hope that these tips can inspire you to, you know, come up with this system of principles that you can do in a democracy or a community, and everyone can abide by that. And if people can work together and agree about these rules, then actually there is actually a very good standard and mode of operation that people can do. All right.
Thank you so much, Ms. Elle. If there are any more questions, please feel free to type it in the chat box or raise your hands. And I would like to also share that this is not simply a Q&A round, it's open for discussion. So if someone wants to comment or give your thoughts on what speakers have spoken, it would be very much appreciated by all of us. While we wait for some questions, I have a question of my own. Ms. Siân, I realize you've had the experience of two virtual groups, and I know from what you've spoken, you feel that the regional group was much more successful in motivating and actually, you know, planning out some of the events. But I was just wondering, considering you've seen both sides, apart from global check-ins, if you have a global virtual group, basically, what are your thoughts of maybe trying to have a better mobilization and, you know, doing something in a global group? I understand the limitations that it might have, but, you know, just like share your thoughts, what you would think that, you know, we could maybe have a much more stronger outreach when it's a global virtual group. Thank you.
That's a really good question. I think what I would like to see is possibly, for example, a project where it can be completed individually, locally, regional groups, but can also be mobilized around the globe. For example, the book project that I mentioned in my talk, that could be done by anyone in the world. And if you think about how big of an impact that could have, if everybody took part in a project of that scale, it's quite extraordinary. So I think for a global group like this one, where meeting isn't really an option, I would I'd love to see projects that could be completed within individual respective areas, but come together to have one big impact and one big show of solidarity and show of love and effort and support, something that can be split and come together for one big impact. I think to be able to see people work together and individually would be a really incredible thing to see, and I think it would bring the global aspect closer together.
Thank you so much, Siân. Thank you. Anyone would like to comment? Any questions? Anyone? Yes, Alicia.
I have a question actually for Ms. Elle. Since you've talked about inclusivity, and there are many groups, small marginalized groups. So how do you think we can build an atmosphere for like inclusion, like regardless of our personal or our religious views? How do you think we can build an atmosphere?
Firstly, safety, the most important thing. People need to feel safe to be able to talk, all right? And it's actually a very difficult thing to ensure safety for people to share, all right? So it really depends on the demographic. For example, let's say if someone is forming a group where women can share about difficult struggles, right? Then the facilitator would actually need to do the homework to be well versed in understanding difficult issues like women's violence against women, all right? And they have to be well versed in these things. So I think that's important, because once the organizers, once they say like, hey, I'm gonna talk about these topics and I know these topics like at least 50%, and it actually encourages people to say like, oh yes, like this person A, this person A which would have experienced that, then the person B would be like, hey, yeah, I have experienced similar things as well. And this is actually how peer support very naturally happens, all right? It's much less structure and more like the group, like maybe 5 people come together and say like, hey, your experiences and my experiences, we can actually, I want to hear yours and you want to hear mine as well. And generally that's how the like peer support happens, all right? So it automatically creates this kind of solidarity as well. The other thing is, I guess, consistency, so the other thing about YouYou that I do is that it doesn't matter if a person comes or not, right, for this week or the next week, all right? I always reassure people that YouYou will be there, all right? So if someone is shy or is facing some issues this week, then they would feel like, they would not have like let people down if they have not attended or if they missed a few sessions. They can always come up the next session and they will realize that there's this channel open for them as well. Yeah, so that's the availability. And actually that's something actually very difficult to pull off, but I always recommend community leaders. I tell them, always remember that the group is bigger than the person, all right? The person is very small. The person has limited means, but the group always has more power to cater for the group. And therefore, the group must always cater for the person. All right, because the group has more means and ability to actually provide for that. All right, so the group should not say like, oh, you didn't come, and therefore, like we should penalize you and stuff like that. It shouldn't work that way, because it's like it's because I come from a church setting. All right. And I actually tell my church last time is that, hey, always remember the church is bigger than the member. All right. The member comes and they have a lot of vulnerabilities and they want to share and they might take a lot, and it's actually up to the church to actually provide for the member as well. And this is the kind of thing that, this is the kind of group principle that people should have. At least this is what I believe as well. Then once we have that kind of mindset, then everyone will start to, at least they have this hope to want to give back to the group as well. Because once you feel that you have been helped, you want to help other people. I think that's what most good people are. All right. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Ms. Elle. And now when I'm looking at the chat box, we've got quite a number of good questions. One question for you, Ms. Sean. Julie Steinbach asks, she loves the book idea. She's wondering if you have specific guidelines of how to make it work best. For example, best places to leave books, how to make attractive, to be safe and accessible to pick it up, and any other learnings. Sean?
So what we did was we went through our own houses to see if there were any books that were suitable, or what we thought as suitable. And we went to charity shops and things like that, and we picked out some books. And we would write a small message inside the book where we'd say, I hope you're having a lovely day. There'd be a quote or a message of inspiration, and we'd sign it with our youth group, #blessed. We'd then ribbon the books, so they'd look really pretty and they'd stand out. And then we'd take them to usually busy streets, busy shopping streets. So whether it was the main street in a village or a shopping street in a city or a town, we'd leave on a bench. That was probably most common. We've left on bus stops as well, because you have that big mix of people coming in and out. And we'd always take a picture of where we'd left them. We'd never seen anyone take one until recently. So the first time I did it, I left a book on my lunch break. And when I left work, when I drove past it, it had gone. And I can't tell you the joy from seeing it gone, knowing that somebody taken the book and it was in somebody else's hands, and they might, it might make them smile, or they might pass it on to someone who could really use a pick-me-up. It was just the best feeling, and we love leaving the books because it just brings us so much joy. But recently I was in Geneva in Switzerland, and we left it on a bench. And within minutes of leaving the book, we turned around and somebody had picked it up. And we couldn't stop smiling. I think all day we were just smiling and remembering the lady who had picked up the book. It's such a simple project, and it's cost effective. Especially if you live in the UK, we've got this cost of living crisis. So you never know how much impact it could have for somebody. Just to have that small act of kindness. And if you live in a wet country like the UK, it might be worth finding an indoor shopping centre or like a shopping complex. So places like that where you've got a lot of people coming in and out, but the books are safe from the horrible rain, then that's a great idea as well.
Thank you so much, Ms. Siân. We do have questions for both the speakers actually, so we'll combine these questions from Ashlyn and from Beth. So Ashlyn asks, what are some things that have worked well for strengthening the connections between the members in your groups in between larger meetings? And Beth also asks a question about what are your thoughts on establishing intergenerational connections? So Ms. Siân or Ms. Elle, any one of you can answer first.
Oh, for Ashlyn's question, I will I will just type it out. All right. Hopefully it's good enough. But
Yeah,
how
I think
about
what Elle is saying is that she replied to me in the chat, and maybe Siân has some thoughts on that, or maybe Elle has some thoughts on intergenerational.
I did have some thoughts on your message, Ashlyn. So with #blessed, because we do a lot of you'd call it work, but I mean we love doing it, but lots of projects and different things where we really have to focus and put maybe a lot of physical or mental energy into it. I found that to strengthen connections there, it really helped us when we had either in-person or virtual social nights. So we play some games, either online or in person. You know, things like charades, just very, very simple games. And it instilled that kind of work and play ethic. So it wasn't always just focus and hard work. There was times we could relax and have fun and get to know each other. So in terms of the program that we've been on, I think it would be lovely to have virtual social nights or social days wherever you are in the world. But the opportunity where you can bond and have fun and forget about the world for a minute and just get to know each other and really put your efforts into the space itself. I think that would definitely strengthen connections.
Thank you, Siân. We have, Elle, would you like to say something?
Oh, I'm
Add
thinking
something?
about answering the intergenerational connections, if it's okay. All right. My thoughts about establishing intergenerational connections. I think like firstly, I got to admit that everyone comes from one generation. Nobody comes from multiple generations. All right. So our perspective is always going to be limited by the years that we are born in, right? Be you born in the 50s or 60s or 70s or 80s. I have issues even relating to people in the 70s or the 90s, all right? But I guess is to be humble, I guess. It's like, you know, like I often tell younger people, right, 90s or millennials, I'll be like, oh, I'm an 80s kid. I don't understand. I don't understand, you know, certain things that you might have understood. Like things like, you know, like then I would tell you all things like, did you know that when I was born, the internet did not exist? That kind of thing, you know, try to use hooks to entice people to say like, hey, oh, what was life like? And actually, for people in the 70s and the 60s, I will actually ask them, you know, what was life like before the Berlin Wall fell? I'm actually a very big, I have a keen interest in history, and I want to know actually the experiences. So to be really honest, I think that the number one thing for me is that like I want to be curious. I want to be curious to people who have went through different things in different countries and different generations. And I want to be very openly wanting to ask them of what is life like over there. And I hope that if the other person, you know, like will be able to reciprocate as well, you know, like I asked them what it was like, and they will ask me, you know, what was it like to live in Singapore? That kind of thing. And then this is how generally to establish a kind of bridge. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you, Elle. I see Lisa's hand is up. Would you like to say something, Lisa?
Yes, I have a question for Ms. Sean, actually. So you've mentioned that you were given 420 trees under the Queen's Green Canopy. May I ask if there is, if you have been shortlisted for this, and if there are criterias for being applicable to receive these trees? And if so, what are the criterias and how does one work towards, accomplishing such a feat as this? Thank you.
So we cheered about the project and we really wanted to take part, but there was quite a long application process. So one of the biggest things was that we needed land, or we needed at least permission where we could plant trees. So we all came together and basically pinpointed several places on the map where we had links to. And in the end, we did manage to have permission from a farm. And in this farm, we measured out the space, sent it back to the Queen's Green Canopy, and they determined that we had space for 420 trees. So the whole initiative was free. They sent us the trees, the saplings, information about the varieties and the species. They sent us some tools. So it was really, really helpful. And I'd never planted a tree before. So it was quite the experience, but we had a good team of volunteers together and we spent several different days planting the trees, which I sometimes drive by and it brings me the biggest smile. I'm not sure if there are global initiatives like this one. I'm quite sure this one was a UK-based one. But I think if you have that kind of spark to try for something like that, there can only be good that comes out. It doesn't matter if you don't succeed. It gives you ideas and the chance to experience something new, the chance to work together and to help your environment and the people in it. So I think if ever you see an initiative like that, always try for it because it's so rewarding.
Thank you, Sean. We have some good news. I think our third speaker is, is going to be able to join us in a few moments. Before she joins, we have one question from Deb Pritchard. Deb asks, what are ways that older women like those in the IWC can encourage younger women to involve themselves? Is it to support individual or regional efforts, to initiate projects like the Brook Project, to have regional young adult networks? What would be your recommendations? Deb hasn't directed the question specifically to either of the speakers. So would anyone like to answer this query from Deb? Sean, Elle?
I would suggest identifying areas in which you could help. So regardless of whether it's individual or regional, if you can see a clear area in your community, in your town, in your country that could do with addressing, I think go for it. So you might be able to help one person, but that could have the biggest impact ever. Or you could impact a group of people or a charity, a community. And I think if you can work together and put all efforts into it, that is so rewarding. I think it would encourage people to join in, especially if you advertise it, if you share progress, share results and achievements and pictures, because you receive support and other people might give you ideas of areas you could help. You could receive real encouragement from the people around you, and it might draw more people in. So I think if you can identify areas that need help and consolidate a group together and share achievements on social media, I think it would be a good Kickstarter for getting people involved.
Oh,
Thank you so
just
much.
gonna,
Yes.
yeah. Oh, sorry, I'm just gonna reply through text, so I'm good.
Thank you. I think our third speaker is here. Without further ado, I would like to introduce and welcome our final speaker for today, Ms. Parichehr Kazemi. Parichehr is a fifth-year doctoral candidate in political science at the University of Oregon, and she's researching social movements and revolutions with a particular focus on women's rights issues and resistance in authoritarian contexts. Over to you, Ms. Parichehr.
Good morning, afternoon, evening, everybody. I'm so sorry for being a little late, but we're here. We're gonna get through all of this together. So I actually have a presentation, so I'm going to share. Oh, it says host disabled participant screen sharing. Can somebody make me a co-host? Perfect.
Done.
Perfect. Can everyone see my screen right now?
Yes, it's visible.
Beautiful. Okay, give me 1 second to. Five. Sorry, give me 1 second here. Okay. Beautiful. Okay, again, good morning, afternoon, evening, depending on where you all are. It's such an honor to be able to speak with everybody today and to share some of the lessons that I've learned over the last few years researching the way that Iranian women use images as a source of protest. So that's kind of what I'm going to be talking about today. I'm going to start by talking a little bit about the latest uprising happening in Iran over the last several months and how images have been so important there. And then I'm going to kind of move in and talk a little bit about my research on a longer women's movement in Iran, where images are very much part and parcel to how women mobilize and strategize and protest gender discriminatory policies and practices. So if anybody has had any kind of social media presence or access to the internet, these are some of the images that you have probably seen over the last several months. There's been a kind of broad-based women's movement happening in Iran that kind of started by the death of a young woman, Mahsa Amini, by the morality police. So these are kind of some of the images that came out after Mahsa Amini's death and after women went into the streets to protest her death and just the very oppressive environment that they've faced for many, many years. So alongside just traditional protests, I mean, a lot of these pictures are of women in the streets, but we also saw some images that seemed a little bit different, like the one on the left where a woman is just by herself, kind of engaged in this, what I call lone wolf active protest, where she's unveiled clearly and standing in front of a monument. So again, these were very, very common images that we saw in 2022 and continue to see today. So it became so clear that images were a very important part to this movement. One writer called the Iranian movement a photo-centered uprising, and Time magazine, in honoring women in being their heroes of the year, actually included pictures of women very similar to the ones that you're seeing here today. So it was very clear that images were a big part of this last kind of stint of women's protests in Iran. So with that in mind, kind of a big question that has been important to me is, what role do images play in Iranian women's movements, right? Like, why is it that they become such an important source of protest? Especially because I think, from my perspective anyway, for a lot of people outside of the Iranian context, these kinds of pictures were their first exposure to women protesting, especially in this way. But these particular kinds of images actually draw on a much longer historical timeline of women's movements in Iran, utilizing images in an environment where women going out to protest physically usually leads to their to their harassment, and in the case of that we've seen in the last few months, to a lot of women's death. So my research kind of focuses on a broader women's movement that started in 2014. So in 2014, Iranian women started taking and sharing pictures of themselves doing things that, if they were to normally do these things in public spaces, they would normally get harassed or arrested for doing these things. And so they started taking pictures in this way as both a form of protest and as a form of like showing their empowerment, showing that they can kind of create these spaces of freedom for themselves. Hence the name of the movement became My Stealthy Freedom. And it was really interesting how it started. It started by this New York-based Iranian journalist who basically took a picture of herself and like out in a public street unveiled, and Iranian women were like, wow, I'm so jealous that you have these privileges that we don't. And so she invited them to send pictures of themselves doing the same thing that she was doing, and kind of reminding them that, you know, women have a longer history of creating their own freedoms within this environment. So in this sense, pictures became like a very basic form of protest. Women weren't going out into the streets, and pictures weren't this secondary medium kind of telling us what was happening on the streets. It was more women taking pictures as a form of expressing their dissent to these kinds of policies, and as a way to show that they can create their own freedoms within this environment. So these are kind of some of the images that we started seeing around this time. From 2014, the images have evolved. Now we're going on almost 9 years in this movement. But we started to see women sending images of themselves, showing themselves unveiled in public spaces, in a variety of public spaces, on beaches, in public parks. In the top right, you can see a woman standing on a bridge. But over time, these kinds of pictures evolved around other kind of daily forms of oppression that women were facing. So not only are women not allowed to choose how they like to dress and whenever they go out in public, but they're also not allowed to ride bicycles. They're not allowed to dance. They're not allowed to jog. They're not allowed to sing. So pictures and videos actually started showing that women were engaging in these things as well. So as you see in the bottom right, women dancing, riding bikes. We also started seeing these pictures really prevalent amongst Iranian schoolgirls that were taking pictures, doing really rebellious things as well. So the image, and then outside of just like showing these things that women can't do through pictures and showing them doing them anyway, over time, this movement started becoming so popular in the Iranian digital and public sphere that it started inviting backlash, right? Like a lot of people seeing women doing these things in public would harass them, would violently coerce them into submission, and women started recording these interactions. So a part of the movement actually just ended up being capturing these very aggressive interactions and sharing them on social media for people to see. And from my perspective, it's really interesting seeing how these kinds of images and videos evolved over time, because at the beginning, you kind of see women like secretly recording these interactions. As you can see, like the person's clearly not aware that they're being recorded. But over time, you see women very boldly taking out their camera phones to start recording the interaction. And you actually see the person, the aggressor, start to back down, start walking away, or change their kind of change their view, change the way that they're expressing themselves. So it was very interesting to see these kinds of things. So for me, a big question, kind of seeing these images, understanding that they're a big part of the Iranian women's movement, was understanding why that is. I mean, I think just kind of me talking about this kind of movement and how it emerged, it's easy to imagine, okay, well, like images have held a very specific function in this movement because, they kind of happens sporadically, and they probably allowed women to express themselves, which that's definitely a part of it. But I wanted to know a little bit more about why they were learned over time from studying these images and studying the way that Iranian women use them, is that one, of course, images provide a sense of safety to social activism, kind of like we saw with the example that I gave of women recording very harmful interactions whenever they occur. They end up becoming a form of defense. That part of the campaign recording these interactions actually ended up becoming called My Camera is My Weapon. And so you kind of see women just very clearly saying that this is a form of defense for us. This is a form of visibilizing these interactions that otherwise would not be seen in Iranian society or outside of it. But outside of that, what's really interesting is that images allow us to also portray our bodies in the way that we want to, which is not a luxury that people have in public protests. So whereas if you think about traditional social activism, where we would go out and we would protest, now take that into consideration in Iran, where protest, where dissent is very costly, and putting your body in harm's way is almost inevitable, right? The body gets placed in a position that it could be arrested, it could be identified, what have you. Well, images allow women a way to kind of show their body, but maybe not show the parts of their body that could be used to identify them. So kind of the pictures that you saw of My Stealthy Freedom, a lot of the pictures are of women with their backs to the camera, right? Well, it's really hard to identify somebody if you can't see their faces. In a lot of other images, you see women using props like sunglasses or signs against their faces to kind of cover parts that could be used to identify them. And the genius of a campaign like My Camera is My Weapon is that the women's voice is present. You see what's happening from the woman's perspective, but her body is completely hidden from you. You can't see her. You only see the person that is interfering and harassing the woman in that case. So images have been a very important source of kind of providing a sense of safety to social activism in this particular case. In the second point, one thing that has become really clear, especially given the name of the movement, My Stealthy Freedom, is that women aren't really waiting until they achieve the goals of their social activism to live out those goals, right? Like if you think about the reasons that we traditionally go out and protest against a law, against a certain practice, what have you, there's always a goal to why we're protesting. In this case, of course, women are using these images as a source of protest, but they're also living out the aims of their protest kind of prefiguratively. So it really becomes a way of living out this image of freedom that you have in your mind in the short term. In the third case, I think one of the most important things to keep in mind in a country like Iran is that authoritarian regimes go to great lengths to try to keep their environment very much controlled. They try to keep their environment free of any form of dissent. So in Iranian case, media is very heavily controlled. All of the media is usually like state-backed networks. So it's very unlikely that they're going to, put out in the air an example of a woman getting harassed by state forces when it's state-backed media. So these kinds of like taking images and combining that with social media, they kind of make these things that authoritarian regimes try to keep hidden. They really visibilize them and they kind of bring them out into view. In the fourth example as well, we have to remember that authoritarian regimes not only control these environments through laws, in this case, laws that dictate how a woman can dress, how she can act in public, but they also dictate how these public spaces can be used, right? So women historically in Iran under the Islamic Republic have very limited access to public spaces. If they want to, dress freely or jog or whatever, they can only go to women's only parks. Outside of that, they're not able to, have free access to public parks to do whatever they want to do. There's also universities are a lot of times are segregated, schools, etc. So women kind of going out and taking pictures of themselves in public spaces becomes a way to challenge not just these policies in place that dictate how they can be, but also these like broader forms of control that combine to create this environment for women. And so with all these things in mind, they kind of combine to give us an idea of why it is that images kind of become so important in the Iranian women's movement. So it becomes much more about just providing a sense of safety, but it also kind of tackles the Islamic Republic, which is the ruling regime of Iran, in like a layered sense. It's a much more complex form of protest, I think. So taking the lessons from Iranian women's activism, how can we kind of incorporate those lessons in our own fights against global oppression, marginalization, and disempowerment, especially as these things get felt in sexism, racism, classism, elitism, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's, social media is something that is us in the West, and I think images are, but it's really important to kind of think about how Iranian women are using them and to kind of disrupt our own thinking about what social media images are and what they can possibly do. So in kind of thinking about how to incorporate these lessons into our own struggles, I would kind of encourage you all to start thinking about the kinds of problems that you face in your own societies and how you would make those visible if you had to use social media images, or if you had to record those things. The problems that you face in society, what would those problems look like if you had to act them out? What are the things, the activities, the places, et cetera, that make you think of those problems? So I think that would be a starting point, and just kind of trying to imagine how those problems materialize, right? Because those problems always material effects on us, and it's important to start imagining what those material effects are. Then I would start asking yourself what it would look like if you didn't have the obstacles that you currently have in place. So if the problems that you view in your own society, if that were to no longer exist, what would that look like for you? Just so to start kind of imagining the sense of freedom that you're trying to seek from kind of obliterating this problem. And then in relation to that, how would you act out that sense of freedom? How would that thought kind of take shape in thinking about freedom from this problem? And in the last sense, if it's a concern to you wherever you live, I would think about ways to anonymize your content. So it's my selfie freedom. One of the most interesting things isn't that images are just kind of used to provide women a sense of safety, but the entire structure of the movement is structured in a way to disconnect women from their content. So women don't post social media images on their own social media pages, but they actually send their pictures to the New York-based journalist, who then posts them on the movement's page or on her own personal social media pages. So not only are women disconnected in terms of their identity in the images, but they're actually disconnected and removed from their content entirely, which of course that's very important in a context like Iran. So I would start thinking about ways that possibly what the consequences would be if you were to be identified with your content, and how you could anonymize your content using both social media as a tool and the image in a way.
Looks like Parichehr has frozen. We'll just wait a moment and hope that her connection rejoins.
Yeah, this is just one of an unimaginable number of ways that they're being used. So I can't wait to start seeing other movements kind of use them in their own ways as well. Thank you all so much. Please stay in touch. I would love to stay connected with all of you. Please reach out. And thank you again for CSW for this opportunity.
Thank you so much, Parichehr. Your presentation was really interesting, and I liked how you've highlighted this power that imagery has, especially in the context of the social movement in Iran. It was really interesting how you've shown how images provide this visibility to the situation, the environment that the women in Iran are facing, and how using these images, they're able to voice the problems, the oppression that they feel that they're under. And the good thing about it was also that it allows for this safe space. They feel that, you can do it without having some adverse effects for them. So I think this was a really interesting and important discussion that you've brought to the fore. And I think we all have had a great learning experience from your presentation, and the takeaway from what we can understand from this particular image-related social media movement that's taking place in Iran. Thank you so much for this. And I would also like to say thank you to all the panelists, in fact, for this brilliant presentations, your thoughts and experience that you've shared with all of us. And we'll now go back to our discussion and question and answer round. Please feel free to ask Parichehr, who's just joined us, and listen to her. And if you have any questions, please raise your hands, or you can also type it out on the chat box. Thank you so much. Alicia, over to you.
Yes, we do have a question. Okay, this question is for Ms. Parichehr. So it's from Emily. This question is, previous speakers have emphasized the importance of personal connection, community, and support in building mobilization and group efforts. So your focus is on the role of images. How have these images actually built a movement and community beyond these individual public statements against the authoritarian regime?
Yeah, I think that's such an important question, especially, as somebody that studies social movements. If you think about the traditional recipe of what it is to create a social movement, you need to have a solid base, right? Like that's a big part of creating a social movement, is trying to find supporters. So whenever you go out on the streets and people try to get your email, it's like a starting point, right? Of trying to pull you in, into creating that base of support, right? Well, Iranian women, unfortunately, have never had that luxury, because if we look at the kind of broader timeline of women's movements under the Islamic Republic, every kind of opportunity that women have had to mobilize, the regime responds in a very particular way to suppress their movement, to kind of disconnect them from one another, to kind of send them back underground. And so in response to that, what's been really interesting is over time, the way that Iranian women mobilize actually has taken shape into that, against that very response. So if we just taking the veil as an example, the hijab, if you look at the veil and how women wear the veil now, it's very different than how they wore it in 1979, whenever the revolution unfolded. But there hasn't been any official change in policy, right? Like the Islamic Republic hasn't come and said, oh, now we can start wearing colorful veils, right? But the way that
I think there's some connectivity issues. We'll just give a moment for Ms. Parichehr to join in again.
I think I got kicked out, but I'm back. But yeah, so just to emphasize that point, that there's kind of, it's not so important to have this solid base and to have the solid community in the Iranian women's movement, just because that hasn't shown to be possible. But it's more important to have this sense of solidarity that gets visualized both in how Iranian women practice their dissent in public spaces and how they visualize that dissent through images.
Okay, thank you so much, Ms. Parichehr, for answering that question. If there are any more questions, you can even raise your hands and ask Ms. Parichehr directly. I think Ms. Olga, she has raised her hand.
Thank you. I am Olga Flores from Bolivia. As you see, I am not young, but I am an eternal activist because I see one thing. In general, all what I hear in this seminar, we are speaking about form and contain. What it is very important to maintain one group, one activity, is the contain, and the content gives the form. Till now, I see many things, I listen a lot of things about the form. We have to be tolerant, we have to do like this or like that, and more in imagines. What it moves and to everybody around the world is that one woman has been killed because he was wearing. It's not the photography that moves us. It's the essential. It goes to the essential of what we are living in this world, and in part, what the women are, we have to live. And sometimes we lose in the forms, no? And for example, I don't criticize how they wear, because in my country the women are so conservative for dress, and this is for me. I don't think that it is good to maintain all the time you're dressing, because they're traditions. Because you will not believe, but that skirt that used the women in Bolivia was an imposition of the king of Spain during the colonial times. So and the government say that it is traditional, etc., etc. No, it was not traditional indigenous. It was one imposition of the crown, Spanish crown. So we have to see the essence of the thing, that it's the contains. And I think that the strong links that we will have are when we go to the contents. The solidarity, we don't have to say you have to be open-minded, but things similar unit. And I feel you, even with are in different part of the globe, of the earth, different cultures, different age, but I feel absolutely linked with you. All what you say, I agree. But we add of each participation. So I think that sometimes it's easy to manipulate with photos, no, with photographies. For example, the feminist movement in Bolivia fight against the church, last Women's Day. And this movement is absolutely paid by the government to make a confrontation with other women that are more conservative. But this one, something what was manipulated. And banalizing, we can say, for example, if I am an industry, fashion maker, I can promote different fashions. No, this is form. But I want to remark the importance of our movement to find things that are contained. And because in essence, the human beings, we belong to the same family. And we don't have to appeal to reasons. You have to do this, you have to do that, this is politically correct. We have to appeal to ourselves, to our feelings, to our emotions. And that's for me very important. And I feel a big emotion to see young people that has energy for fight. And I think that it is important to link and to get deeper and deeper to the contents of what is necessary to fight at this moment. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that insight to this particular discussion. I'm afraid we are kind of running out of the time for our session. I think we're just going to take one more question, and then we'll have a wrap up of this wonderful Q&A and discussion round. I believe we have a question for Ms. Parichehr from Zophie. Zophie asks, I think we all understand that there is a large sense of online safety to social activism compared to going out in the streets to protest, for example. But is there really a sense of safety online? If their bodies or faces are obscured, women and girls are being targeted for online activism. How can young activists ensure their online privacy?
such an important question. I don't think that they can. I don't think that we can ever ensure that we're going to be safe in any form of dissent, right? We have to think about dissent. Anytime we're dissenting, we're usually shaping our political expression or social expression against the dominant expression that exists out there. So just dissent itself is always going to invite some kind of backlash. And then to incorporate that dissent into a social media platform, I mean, hey, like in Iran, especially, there's been social media platforms that have worked hand in hand with the government to try to monitor and suppress dissent online. That's fact. Outside of Iran, I'm not going to say that social media platforms like Facebook, Instagram, Twitter are neutral in any sense. They have their own ambitions. They exist. The social media kind of takes shape in a very algorithmically sensed kind of thing, right? We can't just say that those algorithms are neutral and that they're there to keep us safe as long as we kind of provide that safety for ourselves. I don't think that. I think that would be a very ignorant comment if somebody were to make that, because I don't think that's true. But I think it is important to keep in mind that the strategies that we end up incorporating into our social activism don't stay stagnant. They take shape over time. In the same way that social media takes shape into our dissent, in the same way that the Iranian government has taken shape against Iranian women's dissent, our activism has to continuously take shape in order to ensure our own safety in the best way that we can. So Iranian women, in relation to My Selfie Freedom, there's been several dozen women that have been arrested, those that have been identified, right? But women have kind of, in response to that, have learned to take images in a certain way, or have learned to take their content in a certain way. So social movements are never stagnant in the sense that they happen, there's a strategy, we go, we move, we try to aim for our goal, and we achieve that, right? They're living, breathing things. And then to take into account that a social movement is really the construction of hundreds and thousands and sometimes millions of people with their own individual thoughts and ideas and forms of expression, those things all kind of take shape and relate to one another. And what we see as the social movement, or as its form of expression and images, is just one tiny little particle of all of those relations happening all at the same time, continuously. So for sure, I absolutely agree that we can't ever ensure our own form of safety, but it is very important for us to be aware in how we can kind of shape our safety against these other kinds of things that we see out there that are always trying to suppress our dissent. That's, I think, the most important thing.
Thank you so much, Parichehr. Thank you to all our three panelists. And of course, thank you to the audience for this wonderful question and answer and discussion round. Thank you, everyone. And over to you, Emily.
Yes, thank you. I have the honor of closing this session, so I won't keep you long because I'm sure that many of you have other events that you would like to attend at CSW. But on behalf of IWC and everyone attending, I'd like to thank our speakers, Siân, Elle, and Parichehr, as well as our moderators, Alicia and Kenkor. It has been very interesting hearing about your experiences of mobilizing around social justice issues and as part of the International Women's Convocation's Young Adult Program. And I'm struck by how much individual connections as well as emotion seem to matter so much for mobilization. We talked about solidarity. That seems to be the most important component. And it's really exciting to see how community level efforts can make big differences and can inspire people and spread. And we've definitely been given food for thought for the continuation of this program and for how we can play a part in social mobilization. We're also grateful for tech support from Ashlyn and Zophie. And Anna Maria and Sylvie have also been a great help in developing the flyer for this event and in promoting the event. And thank you also to all the members of the audience who made this session come alive with your questions and your comments. We also want to thank all of the resource speakers and participants of the program. It's been a year-long program that has led up to this. And many of the participants and resource speakers are here today in the audience as well. So thank you to them. And then the final thank you actually goes to the IWC for making this program possible through grants from the Unitarian Universalist Association and the European Unitarian Universalists. We look forward to continuing this work and these discussions in the future. Thank you so much for staying till the very end, and yeah, keep in touch. Thank you.